Bible and Pop Culture's podcast. We're so glad you're here. I'm your host, Mia Burke, curator for Bible and Pop Culture magazine. For years, I taught Bible and Pop in the classroom and had a blast and learned as much as I taught. But now we're taking it to the streets for honest exploration of authentic Christianity through pop culture. Welcome to Bible and Pop Culture. In this month's edition, we're looking at deconstruction, questioning and doubts, exploring kind of what it is, why it's so prevalent in the church today, and what it looks like for many going through it. We also wanted to take a look at the church's response to those working through their faith. And finally, what are the ways that we can serve those working through their questions, doubts, and deconstruction? In thinking about this topic, I thought this discussion would best be held by millennials, who are numerically the largest demographic, and they're the most open in their faith journey going through deconstruction. So I'm inviting those active millennials, active in ministry, to other millennials to have a discussion today. So today's Pastoral Roundtable includes 6 of my really good friends. So Dave, can you introduce yourself, your ministry, and where you're from?
Sure, David Collins. I am from Georgia, and I'm living in Georgia now. I was in the military for a while and went all over the place, but we've settled back where we began. So I'm the senior pastor of New Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church in Valdosta, Georgia. We're right off of I-75 if you're coming up from Florida. So holler at your boy, come see us. I love Jesus, love what I do, and I love all of y'all.
Awesome. Philip, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, I'm Philip Oswald. I am living in Columbia, South Carolina right now at a church called Eastlake Community Church. And I've just kind of been a little bit all over the country doing ministry. I've been here a year and a half and moved from the West Coast before this. And now I'm on the East Coast, so I'm getting a little picture of everything. But yeah, definitely, I've been doing ministry now for 20 years, and I'm not done learning, and it keeps changing.
Very true. Cameron?
Hey guys, I'm Cameron Cortez here in Honolulu, Hawaii. I serve out of Metro Christian Church, where I'm on staff overseeing discipleship and connection. So everything from our small groups to our studies to just help people get plugged in deeper into our church community. Been doing that for the past 5 years. And I am also faculty at Pacific Rim Christian University teaching the history of world civilizations.
Awesome. And then Drew?
My name is Drew Witt. I grew up in North Texas, moved to South Texas 2007, I think. Yeah. I can't do math on the fly. And we've planted 2 churches here, a very large church in the north suburbs of San Antonio. And the last 9 years, I've been downtown San Antonio planting kind of an urban church. And it's been lots of fun. Like Philip, this is, I think, my 19th year in ministry. And it always gets more interesting.
Awesome. And then my co-moderator today will be Keegan Drummond. Keegan, can you introduce yourself as well as what you do with Bible and Pop?
Yeah, my name is Keegan Drummond. I'm a second-year MDiv at Duke Divinity School, and I serve on the creative team at Bible and Pop Culture, helping out with community outreach.
And you're a blessing. I love it. Welcome, and thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. So let's kind of open up. I read a book by Phyllis Tickle, and she has this theory that every 500 years, there's a rummage sale in the church. We just see every 500 years, we come to some type of crisis, and then there's a new iteration born out of that crisis. You look at Martin Luther, you look going later into some of the great revival will come out of the next 500 years. And she posits that we're at that next crisis, that next crossroads, that, you know, the basics of the church will always stay the same, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, but there's a new iteration of how we do church. So thinking of that, what are we seeing right now? What are you seeing where you're doing ministry, and kind of where is that coming from, possibly in looking at the bigger picture of history? So maybe Cameron, as our historian, maybe you want to kind of jump from there.
Yes, I recall actually having to read this book for one of my theology classes and just trying to understand what was going on. I believe she proposed that the next phase was going to be something called emergence Christianity. And after going through what we have been, there's been a lot of different things emerging I think one of the things I've been noticing for here in Hawaii, at least, is the politicization of Christianity. There seems to have been people taking sides one way or the other, whether you're Republican or Democrat. There's a lot of things that are issue-based, whether founding in politics or just within social justice. There's a lot of movement with online. There's a lot of things regarding pandemic. So there's a few things I'm thinking about looking at Phyllis Tickles, and I was getting tickled my mind, going, did she kind of prophesy this in a way, or just in some sense? So there's a lot of things we're seeing, and it's tracking a lot with what we're seeing in history.
We've noticed here that, well, I'll say I've noticed as my progression from the mega church world into a smaller church, that there was a moment where it felt like people would bring their friends to church so that the pastor could show them Jesus. You know, bring your friends here and we're going to do the work for you, right? Like, I've got this neighbor, they don't know Jesus. If I get them to church, my pastor's going to love me and he's going to tell them about Jesus and everything's going to be good. And now what I'm seeing is, I'm not bringing anybody to you, but will you equip me to be who I need to be at my work? You know, let's say I'm a realtor. How do I live out my faith as a realtor in a real way? And now I would say our people want to be the evangelists now, and they don't really necessarily tie themselves to our church specifically, where it used to be, at least in my experience, you know, I go to the First Baptist Church, or I go to such and such community church, and my identity is a lot about the church that I've attached myself to. Now it's like, I'm a follower of Christ. Who's going to help me live out my faith as a plumber? And if this church is going to disciple me and equip me, then I'm in. So I've noticed that shift, at least in my ministry. And that's been across the country, not just here.
So where is this awakening coming from? One of my observations is that we're not as apt to put up with denominationalism as we were in the past, you know, not as divided, not as apt to be entertained maybe as we were in the past. Where is this shift coming from of this disillusionment or maybe dissatisfaction with business as usual for the church?
I think COVID-19 has kind of propelled us into a place that we were already going much more slowly, which is people, for good reason, I think, were dissatisfied with the model of the church as a building and not as a body. And I can say that for myself, which was people got sick of going to church and, like Philip was kind of saying, and not being equipped to be the church. So there was a lot of, especially in you guys who are in the South, you know, there's a church on every street corner. Most of them are family members, and very few of them can tell you the last time somebody joined the church, much less got saved. So I think that people, especially in COVID-19, when people couldn't come into the building for such a long time, they started realizing, well, what am I really missing now that I'm not doing this thing that you told me I have to do every week? How is my life different? Is it better because I'm not going in there faking the funk? Is it better because I'm not stuck in a commute going to do something that I just do every week? Or, and what we're experiencing in our church down here is that people wanted the word of God. They didn't want to do church. And I'm certainly not anti-church as a pastor. That'd be kind of ridiculous. It's anti-Jesus being at church. That's the bride of Christ. I'm with it. But we have to see that the church is not an organization. The church is the people. It's an organism. If we tell people that I'm offering you entrance to an organization, I can see why people wouldn't want to be a part of that. But if you show people that this is a personal relationship that God is offering you, that you are individually valuable, and there is something for you to do that if you are not here, it will not get done in the way that it would if you did it. You know, I play saxophone. Okay, maybe somebody else would do music, but it wouldn't be me doing it in that way. And people need to see that they are valuable to God. And if we as ministers, as people who are title holders or in ministry, whatever, don't show people that they're valuable to us, then they're not going to be there. And if they're not coming to us as the representatives of Christ, then if I'm not showing you that I'm valuable to you and you don't know Jesus yet, why are you going to think you're valuable to him? So I think that COVID-19 has forced us to look in the mirror as Christians and say, who am I? And what do I offer the world other than be here at 11 or whatever time you come on Sunday? And now you check the box.
And Drew, are you seeing anything different in Texas as far as, you know, people questioning, people doubting, people wanting something more authentic?
It's real fascinating. Our first church, we grew from like 8 people to 900 in 3.5 years. They were the number one fastest growing church in America in 2016. Outreach Magazine did a thing on it. And it was basically like, if you didn't have like 300 people at your church plant, you were doing something majorly wrong. San Antonio, heavily Catholic city, heavily religious, big Hispanic culture in San Antonio. It's like, if you couldn't get people to come to church, you're doing something wrong. That was the suburbs, where it's mostly like upper middle class white. You know, the average person has a master's degree and a golden retriever and a lake house, you know. And so when we came downtown, on the street our church is on is a male strip club, an abortion clinic, tons of bars, and about 6 gay bars. That's where our church is. So like, we have very different soil. So in the same city, I've seen the same things, but where we're at, there's like less incentive to go to church socially, because you're not in the suburbs. You're not working at Valero or USAA with all your other white Christian middle class friends. If you're in the urban core, you have different lifestyles, different shapes. So I've seen both, but what I've noticed, there's 4 things I've been thinking about, is the role that technology plays in all this. The last great disruption in the English Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, you had the printing press. And the printing press enabled like Luther's ideas to get out. It's like the spreading of his information. And so technology had a really big role in the last Reformation. And since then, now we have the internet, which is like the greatest leap of technology and communication we've had in the last 500 years versus the printing press. So I think you have like technology, you've got a newer generation of young people who like don't put up with BS. And we were like raised on fog machines and realized that really doesn't change the heart. And so we're like ready to throw that stuff out. And then you've got the polarization of our world is just incredibly more and more polarizing, whether that's issues or politics. You have the speed of the information we consume and the hot take culture. And then you have the church, who's number 5, I guess, who's gotten lazy. And we've like loved being in the center of culture. We've loved being the center of people's lives. We have like multi-million-dollar real estate investments. Like, you think of the billions of dollars the church has in America, a prime real estate that's used like 5% of the time. And now we're in this time where like people aren't coming here, and we've gotten lazy. A friend of mine says, we have a multi-million-dollar trellis and no vine. We have no life to give anybody. Oh, there's a story. So I think this illustrates the American church is, I think it was Francis Schaeffer was touring the Vatican, and a cardinal was giving him a tour. And this isn't hate on anyone who's Catholic. I love Catholics, love Roman Catholics. But I think Schaeffer was touring the Vatican, and they were looking at all the antiquities and the wealth that the church had. And the cardinal leans over and he says, the church can no longer say, silver and gold have I none. And Francis Schaeffer quickly quit back and he said, neither can you say, pick up your mat and walk. And so like, when you have that as a reality, like we have silver and gold, we have billions of dollars in real estate, but we don't have the life of Jesus to really give you because we've gotten lazy and we've just been playing religion. And you add technology, a new generation, polarization, the speed of our culture. Yeah, there's no incentive for young people to stick around because church is a pretty dumb hobby. Like, buy a boat, like go surf, like don't come here on the weekends. You're an idiot if you come here on the weekends if it's your hobby. So I think a lot of deconstruction is just people wrestling with, do you actually love Jesus? Or were you here for all the like paraphernalia that your parents told you were important? So when people deconstruct, I'm like, good, keep digging. So hopefully we get all this crap off you, and maybe you can find the real Jesus and the world will be better. So that's what I've seen here in downtown San Antonio.
And it really goes with what AJ Swoda says in his book, Doubt. He talks about, the Jesus that the persecuted church is dying for is that the Jesus that we know here in America. I think that's what we're desperate for, and we want to see it. We want to see people living it out. We want to see disciples because it's real. And I think that's what millennials and Zs are after, is real. So Keegan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was interested in the topic of culture. We're getting bombarded with culture, with secular culture as a result of technology, like Drew was saying. And I wonder if the church has a temptation to maybe imitate the culture or replicate the culture or be the same thing so that it attracts millennials. And that has somehow sort of diluted the Christian message, whether it takes on the culture, the liberal culture or the conservative culture. I think it goes both ways. I see that in both the evangelical streams and the mainline Protestant stream. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, whether we need to be countercultural or with the culture, or what do we do with culture?
It's about the pronouns that you choose to use about your Christian experience. Do I say that we don't care about so-and-so? Or do I say that we don't do this because that's what some Christians or some churches do? And when I hear that, I try to take ownership for what I do and what I don't do. Like, I am a 38-year-old pastor of a missionary Baptist church in South Georgia, and I don't have the same stylistic preaching ways or ideas as the other pastors in my area within 10 miles around of me who are 40 and under. So to say that there can be a culture of Christianity in America that people need to buy into and then maintain is exactly why I see people leaving. Because if I say this is what we do, and let's say that we get everyone in America to agree, that's 4% of the world. So we get everyone to agree on this American version of Christianity. Let's get every white person to say Black Lives Matter, or every Black person to say all lives matter. And let's say that's our culture and the culture is Republican or Democrat. What have we done about Jesus? Like, that still is missing the mark. Illustration that I see is that I've been to church after church where they have an evangelism ministry that's usually understaffed or just on a program. And it's not a function of what they do. And Jesus told us in Matthew 28 and 18, I've given you all authority. Now go into all the world and make disciples. And so if we say that we have a culture and we take on this pronoun of we, now someone's in Hawaii, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, and we call us a we, but we're not even all doing the same thing, which is fine because stylistically that doesn't matter anyway. Like, we're still not doing what Paul did. We're still not doing what Matthew did. We're still not doing what Luke did. If Christians get into the idea that we are a we, that says to the world, you're the they. And then we stop growing. Because as I teach ministers, I tell them, you say, well, we do this, but the world does that. Then you've forgotten that the function, that the reason that Jesus died, rose again, and left us the Holy Ghost is so that we could grow the church, not to commentate on the world. So I don't think that the church can say, this is us and y'all are them, and then expect for people to say, because that's how the Judaizers and the Jews ran into issues in Acts 15 anyway, because they were like, well, first you got to be Jewish and you got to be circumcised and you got to be like us, and then we'll talk about Jesus. And what we're seeing in this society is people don't want that. They're not like, you're not going to be a gatekeeper for me and then tell me how to do it. I'm not doing that. And it's not Christ-like, it's not biblical, and it's not working. So I think that we got to go back to, it's so radical, we got to go back to Acts chapter 2. If we're trying to see how this thing worked, you can go back 500 years. African-American churches in America love to go back to Azusa Street, love to go back to Antebellum, and you can say, well, we want to go back to before this happened. But if we stop before how this thing started and say, that's our we, then of course people are going to say, that's stupid, I don't want to do that. Because I don't even do that.
I don't know if any of you guys watched the movie by Martin Scorsese, Silence. It was in 2016, based off the book by Shunsaku Endo. But it's about Japanese converts and the priest that went over to help with the missionaries there. And it's just this really compelling story. And it actually ties to a deconstruction of faith. So if anyone's like really struggling or wrestling through that, honestly, it's a really good movie to like digest and work through. But one of the things I was observing in it and just even appropriating for this podcast was when we look at culture, when we try and see it in like how Dave was talking about, like us versus them sort of thing, it creates this dichotomy that's unhealthy. Whereas you look down on the culture, you say, well, that's not us. You want to separate yourself. You create a us versus them sort of dynamic. And the one thing that was kind of interesting in the film was the priests genuinely thought that they were evangelizing and preaching the gospel and making disciples. But what they failed to see was they were creating a offshoot of Christianity where the Japanese, who had a language barrier, a cultural barrier and everything, didn't fully understand who Jesus was. And they were doing this more out of to please the priest than they were to follow Christ. And it was creating this like really tense moment as far as when the Japanese authorities were trying to force them to recant their faith. They didn't target the people, they targeted the priests. And they said that we're going to have you recant your faith by torturing the people. And the story is just really compelling in the sense of like, okay, are we having people come to a cultural Christianity and coming to us to fill our egos, to fill our coffers, or to fill our pew seats? Or are we trying to teach them to follow truly after Jesus? And that was just really compelling for me, because when we're talking through this whole deconstruction thing, I think that's what's happened for a lot of people in the church, that they're like, wait, what are we actually believing in? Am I here for a personality? Am I here for this? If that's true, I'm out. Or they start like ripping apart their faith. I think that's where we kind of have to like settle back down on, as far as the church is concerned, really getting back to the core issue of the gospel.
I just don't think that we care anymore about the lead pastor or the church organization. I mean, I just don't care. And that's just me, but I don't think anybody cares anymore. It just feels like the church has spent so much time building its own image, its own individual images, that we've gotten tired of it. And so for me, as far as engaging the culture, I think you just have to be living your life with a different lens of just, my life is my ministry, not I am a pastor and I am at a church and people come to me to hear me sing or to hear me teach. It's no, I am Philip. I love Jesus, and everybody that I meet, I hope they see Jesus in me. And that's where my ministry is really happening. And yeah, it's in culture. Maybe it uses technology. Maybe it doesn't. I'm just in the world living my life, hopefully as a reflection of Christ. But everybody that I'm meeting, I'm not trying to make my disciple like be like Philip. No, be like Christ. Because guess what? I'm going to let you down too. So it's like, it's almost like, come here, let me show you what I found. It's not me, and honestly, if you're close to me, you'll realize it's definitely not Philip. It's Christ. And so, okay, that is what I'm focused on. And if you see something in my life that might be different, it's me reflecting him. And let me show you how I do that. And a lot of people say that, but very few people actually do that. And I would say out of 20 years in ministry, I am just now at the place where I'm really seeing that happen in my life. This morning, I am currently at a church, but my church doesn't even have offices. I mean, that's why I'm in the hallway at my church. This is the hallway outside of our auditorium. We don't even have offices. I spent the first part of my day from 7 to noon selling coffee at a farmer's market. That's what I did. Is it about my church? No. Am I a Christian pastor at a church? Yes, but I'm living my life on mission, if that makes sense. And I think the more we put people, and this is what our generation has seen, is we've put pastors on these pedestals. Every one of them has let us down. No human was ever designed to take that weight either. So it's not just the pastor that's the bad guy. I mean, no human being was designed to take the place of Jesus. So when we put them on that pedestal and say, okay, pastor, live the life that I can't, and I'm going to think you're amazing, and I'm going to tweet you, and I'm going to share you, and I'm going to do, well, that pastor is going to let you down. He is just like you. And the previous cultures really enjoyed saying, my pastor lives this Christian life that I can't live. Nobody would ever say that, but that's what they were doing. And my generation and the generations that follow, my kids, they just don't care, or they don't trust that pastor. I mean, my kids live with me, so they definitely don't put me on a pedestal. And, but they do see joy and they do see hope in me. I think my kids see that I'm a peaceful person, and they see the fruits of the Spirit being lived out in me through my flawed nature.
That's great. So, those who are in deconstruction, and that's really, really hard to define because you have questioning, you have doubt, and you have that process of taking apart what you previously were taught or believed, looking at what remains, chewing the fish, spitting the bone. And then hopefully there is some point where you reconstruct into something else that you're sure of, you're positive of. This is who I am. This is what I believe. So looking at how we as a church are handling deconstruction, like Keegan said a little while ago, I believe it was you, Keegan, that said, it's not even being talked about. We've been in this for about 2 months as Bible and Pop, doing a lot of research, doing a lot of reading. It's just not being discussed. And it is happening on a massive level. I mean, the Barna study from 10 years ago said 2/3 of people raised in the church are leaving. Well, with the advent of COVID, with deconstruction happening all in our culture, I'm sure those numbers are greater now. So the fact that the church really isn't having this discussion largely, how are we responding to it? Are we handling it well? Is there an appropriate response to someone who has questions and doubts individually? I know that's a big question, but just kind of wanted to focus the conversation now back onto what is the church's current response?
Our church has changed the way that we are defining success. Previously, church defined success by programs, attendance in programs, maybe baptisms. There were different things that we would put the check box on. We would say, yep, we had a successful year. We baptized this many people. We had this many people in programs. And our shift has been towards discipleship. Are you being discipled and are you discipling? And so that is my thing as a pastor. Who am I discipling and who am I being discipled by? And not just me as a pastor, because we don't have pedestals anymore. We're getting rid of those. And it's every church member. So I might be a spokesperson for our church, but every church member is challenged with that question. Who are you discipling and who are you being discipled by? And that is our response to the deconstruction of the church. It is not about how many people are in this building. 10 people could show up tomorrow. It does not matter. But let's say there's 500 people who call this church their home. Are those people discipling? Okay, we're doing church. Not how many people showed up. And to me, that's the biggest shift, at least for my church, is that we don't any longer determine success by getting people in the building. It's over. Those days are over.
It's great. So what is discipleship? What is that? How do you define that?
The fact that the church hasn't taken spiritual formation very seriously is partly to blame for people not being formed and discipled and saying, well, I don't want this. I grew up in the church, and in 2010, so 11 years ago, found that my soul was dying in the church. And I was a worship pastor. I preached once a month. I named the church that we'd started. And after 4 years of that, Sunday was the most stressful day of the week. And I ended up in a counselor's office because I was depressed. We had the fastest growing church in America. We had all the success people wanted. We had $1 million cash in the bank, and I was depressed. And so my soul was dying. So I felt like I had to leave to go seek first the kingdom of heaven and meet Jesus, which is a terrible thing, that you shouldn't have to leave his body to go find him. Right. And so I walked away from ministry for the second or third time in 2011, which is always fun when you tell the church you're leaving and you don't have anything else to go to. That raises some interesting questions. But what I felt the Lord say was to come downtown where we are now and to seek first his kingdom, to make disciples and to do it with other people. I didn't come down here to plant a church. And so what happened was we accidentally and reluctantly started a congregation because we were meeting Jesus and we were helping others meet Jesus and we were ministering to the poor. It was crazy, the things that we were seeing God do. And we needed a place to put them, to form them, to disciple them, to love them. And I couldn't find a place I trusted. And so we ended up starting our church to be a safe place where there was green pastures and there was still waters and there were no wolves. When people come to our church I'd say 95% of the people in our church have some train wreck in their rearview mirror, whether that's with their faith, with their family, with relationships, with the church, whatever. Almost everyone who shows up is a basket case. They have a ton of baggage and they're not okay. So our tagline for our church is, it's okay to not be okay. When people start sharing about their questions or their deconstruction or their doubts, as a pastor, I'm like, yeah, been there. And this is how we started this church, because I was there. Like, we started the church for me because I needed a safe place to ask questions because I couldn't find one. God has helped us to be a place where it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to come and push and pull. God's given me, because of the pain, because of my own deconstruction, I've come to a place where, like, I can handle the questions, I can handle the trauma, I can handle the accusations, I can handle the church has been a bad word to you, I'm so sorry. Because it's not my faith, it's the faith. I'm not the author and perfecter of the faith, it's Jesus, and it's his church, and I just get to love and serve his people, as he told Peter to do. So it kind of takes all the pressure off, I think. So that's what we've been doing. Unintentionally, by the way. It's not like we set out to go be the church for those who are deconstructing. It's just kind of what God was doing in me, and I've seen the fruit of that. But I'd love to hear what Cameron has to say about spiritual formation and discipleship. And
Joe, I think you're hitting it right there on the head as far as the best thing I think someone could have as far as when they're going through deconstruction is to have those safe places to have these conversations. I think for a long time in the church, we don't have that. You know, you show up on Sunday, there's a rock concert and a pep talk, and then be on your merry way. And there's no room to engage. There's no room to talk. There's no room to have that genuine conversation. And like for most pastors and for most staff, you know, on a Sunday, it's like your busiest day. So if someone's talking to you, you're like, you got 5 minutes, buddy, before I gotta go on to something else. And there's no way you can develop a relationship. There's no way you can develop anything from there. Now, the quick response usually for most churches is, oh, let's throw on a program, let's throw on a ministry, let's shuffle them into a small group. And unless those small groups or those programs or whatever you're shuffling them into is designed for them to have these conversations or to be safe enough to do that, then it's no different than being there on Sunday if it's just going to be surface level relationships. So one of the things we've been trying to do, at least at our church, is we're redefining the win, much like what Philip said. We're trying to say, okay, what is home plates? What is actually scoring? It's not butts in seats. It's not people tithing or whatever. It's people being changed by Jesus to live like Jesus. And that's what we're trying to really look at. We're trying to reconstruct all of our ministries, all of our programs to head in that direction. And one of the things that I've been noticing, at least as far as what I've been seeing as successful, are the things that help people to engage, help people to have these conversations, help people to be genuine enough to bring these forward. I don't know if any of you guys heard of the program Alpha. It's a wonderful evangelism tool. I know a lot of churches using it. Our church is planning to launch it, but it's one of those areas where it's like, hey, we're not going to preach at you. We're not going to give you the answer. We're not here to bash the Bible on your head and be like, hey, well, according to, this verse here that you have no context for, that's how you should live. It's come with your genuine questions and we'll discuss about it. We'll dialogue it. There's no other place for that to happen right now in the church. And I think if we can curate those spaces, that'll really help people who are deconstructing or going through doubt, or even if they're a well-seasoned believer, they might need to have these things expressed.
I think back to what it was like for me growing up in church and feeling disenfranchised and feeling like it was just kind of a very showy and silly experience for me. I dealt with an absentee father, a depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts as a kid, and then grew up with all that stuff that even though I was in church every week, none of that stuff really got addressed. I never got that personal satisfaction from that. When I came into this position as pastor, which was just interim in a year ago, and I've only been their pastor since November. So I haven't met most of the people who I pastor. So the only way that we could connect with them, that we found to connect with people, has been caring about them. You got to do that. So what we do is every day at noon, we get on the phone on a conference call and do what's called our midday motivation. Every day at noon, Monday to Saturday, we'll stop what we're doing and we pray. They can ask questions about what the sermon was about. People will say, I've got a transgender daughter who's marrying a woman. How do I love somebody like that? I don't think it even occurred to me coming up in church how weird that was until people were saying like, I don't think I've ever had a chance where I could be like, hey, pastor, on Sunday, you said so-and-so. How do I apply that to this situation I'm going through with my husband who just cheated on me, or my wife who says she doesn't believe anymore? And we get to have that dialogue. For us, it's been transformational. The growth that we're seeing in our church has very little to do with what goes on from 11 to 12 on Sunday, and everything to do with what goes on from 12 to 1 Monday through Saturday. That people are hungry for it. And there are people who are, like I said, we're in South Georgia, but there are people all over the country and sometimes in other countries who are on that line who are like, hey, I want to talk about some stuff. I need someone to, no kidding, pray for me. You know, that's why I open up about my mental health journey. I open up about that stuff because people want something that they can identify with. They don't want to just be, so like if you want to impact culture, you do that by people and relationships. So if someone sees, hey, this is David. Oh yeah, by the way, he's a pastor, but yeah, he's dealing with so-and-so and such and such. And he's willing to say, yeah, I'm not perfect. Or if they ask me a question and I know the answer to, I say, I don't know. I'm going to look it up. We'll talk about it tomorrow. You know, people are looking for that authenticity. So I try to be the kind of leader that I would want to follow, because I never needed another program to make me love Jesus more. I never needed another ministry with another name or with a catchy kind of tagline. I wanted someone in the times when I gave those micro expressions, like, I'm sad today. I don't really feel like being at church. I don't know if I really want to be here. What I usually got was, well, you ought to work on your faith, brother. You need to pray more. You're not going to small group. How's that working for you? What I needed was someone to say, hey, man, so what's that like for you? I've been depressed. I've been suicidal. I'm going through stuff and I'm still saved. And that doesn't mean you're not saved. Let's talk about what that really means. So for us, you know, and it's not a big, again, we're a small church. If that's the model that Jesus set up, a bunch of imperfect people who he deployed into the entire world, that 2,000 years later, we're still here doing it. I think we go back to the way that Jesus set it up. My prayer, asking for some Solomon style wisdom, is, Lord, as we're growing, don't let me grow past the ability to care for people. Because if we get so big that I'm like, yeah, well, we don't have time for midday motivation anymore. I don't have time to get to know you guys. And I'm not saying it has to be specifically me. I'm telling the folks who are on the call, been on the call for the last year, hey, pretty soon we're going to get too big and you're going to be running one of these. And I'll be popping in when I'm not on the one, because you need to be doing this. And that's how that thing grows. Again, you go back to it. It's just, I know that in Peter's Genesis sermon, 3,000 folk got saved, but I don't know anybody else who's seen that happen out. You know what I mean? A growth model, it's got to be an investment in people kind of model to get to the point that you're like, yeah, I know I'm valuable to you. I know I'm valuable to God. And I know that I don't bring God anything he doesn't already know about me and love me for.
I'm a story guy. It kind of hits to what Dave was talking about. But when the last church I was at was growing, and we got to that point of like, we don't know what to do with all these people. And I was of the mindset that like half of them weren't even saved. And I swear, if you looked at their giving records, it would prove the point. That's a joke. I didn't look at the giving records, but we were poor. And this pastor says, hey, I want to send my chief of staff to spend the day with y'all, to help y'all. So he comes down and meets with us, spends a day. He goes, oh, you know what your problem is? Y'all think like shepherds, and you need to start thinking like ranchers. And that was his like advice to us. And he laid out for the next half a day how we could become ranchers. They were like all in. And I would sit at the tables like, maybe I'm simple-minded, but it's the Lord is my shepherd. It's not the Lord is my rancher. The church became a ranch, and it became, how do we flip the seats, and how do we do, 2 Saturday night services and 5 Sunday morning services. And a lot of this comes down to like, man, so much of our, especially white evangelical Christianity is like, how do you build ranches so you can get your book deal?
I feel like I don't really want to move past that sort of that feeling of disenfranchisement that David talked about. When I was hearing what Drew was saying, I just felt like, man, by the grace of God, someone reached you, David. But I feel like our churches are just so out of touch. We don't know necessarily how to love people. And we've been like throwing around this word a lot with love. And I pushed back on this in our pre-briefing meeting. Like, what do we even mean by love anymore? So what does love and discipleship look like in the church during the age of deconstruction? I wonder if there's a temptation for us. G.K. Chesterton has a quote: "I don't want a church that tells me I'm right when I'm right. I need a church to tell me I'm wrong when I think I'm right." I feel like there might be a temptation to do just that in the age of deconstruction, a church that feels the need to tell people they're right when we know deep down they're probably wrong. So what does love and discipleship look like, these terms that we've been kind of throwing around? What does it look like in this age?
You're kind of talking about the fruit of the Spirit is kindness, but being kind isn't always being nice. Loving someone doesn't mean you get to let them play in the street when a hormone in tennis shoes is drive Corvette 60 miles an hour. The loving thing is to yell and get them out on the street, right? That's kind, but you kind of have to, you can't be nice about it. A guy who's discipling me told me a couple weeks ago, he says, "Drew, you can love people or you can control them, but you can't do both." And so that's kind of my thermometer these days is I can love them or I can gaslight them, but I can't do both. I can love them or I can manipulate them, but I can't do both. I can love them or I can control them using religious language and orthodoxy, but I can't do both. So what does it mean to love this person? And sometimes I don't know, but I think for me, it is enough to go, I'm tempted to manipulate and control and use lots of religious language to get them to like do something. And just to recognize that wolf tendency that some of us pastors have and to go, that's actually a wolf. That's what a wolf would do. That's not what the good shepherd would do. That's what a rancher would do. That's not what the good shepherd would do. And I need to lean into how do I patiently listen, love, care, cry, or rebuke appropriately and say, actually, have you thought about that? You know, I don't know what the answer is, but I know those are the questions I'm often running myself through. How I was trained to not love people, I was trained to control and manipulate them with orthodoxy and religious clothing. But I feel God trying to teach me how to love them.
I think we know how to love. Jesus told us, like, the most important thing you do is that you love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. And the second, which is as important, is love your neighbor as yourself. So as a leader in church, I just go back to, is this what I would want if I was not the pastor making this happen? Like if I were in the pew, if I were in rehab, if I were in detox, if I were at an abortion clinic, if I were wherever I am, is what I'm doing what I would want? And then I would invite somebody to that. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you get food poisoning. You're going to be like, but it's Arby's, and that's a big brand and they got lots of money. So you should go there. Do you go there? Heck no, I got sick there. Well, I do go, but I don't eat anything. Like, you can tell what someone needs because it's probably what you need too. I try to focus on, would I do this to someone I love? What I'm doing that I'm saying I'm doing for Jesus, would I want someone who I love who's in crisis to have that? If my answer is no, it ain't love. It's not. Am I sacrificing of myself? And the other thing is, does it put me in a place that is not comfortable because of my position? Because if you're, like you said, it like Drew was saying, if you're a rancher, you have no connection. You've probably got other people who are controlling all the kind of things that are going on all over the ranch, and you probably have no concern or care about exactly how many sheep you've even got, even though Jesus charged us to secure the 99 and leave them and to go get the one who's lost. I can't ascend to a position in ministry. I can't get so educated. I can't get so comfortable in my salvation that I stop caring about growing the body of Christ through evangelistic love for other people. So if my goal then becomes sustaining the church, I've stopped loving the world. I've stopped loving the unsaved. So that means that I've got to care enough about the people that Jesus thought were worth dying for to stretch myself for them and to do for them what I wanted, not indoctrinate them into what I'm doing. Because there are a lot of churches that are doing that right now. And especially in the South, you guys know it. They're just moving members from church to church. They get pissed off at me, so then they go to Phil's church. And they don't like what he's saying, so then they go to Drew's spot. and then they need a time away, then they go to Hawaii. And there's and no one is actually changing in terms of their relationship with God and their eternal salvation.
No, I've noticed, I haven't been I sound like an old man when I say this, and I'm not that old, but I have witnessed different changes in what it is to be a pastor. And I go back to, I think a lot of people in ministry that are, quote, full-time pastors are people that kind of fit a mold, not necessarily always people who heard a call from Christ to go start a church or whatever it may be. And again, I am not the person who gets to determine that, but I've seen it change. And here's what I mean by that. When I first started leading worship for churches and student groups and different things, it was not a cool gig, okay? I was playing piano, which is not a cool instrument. And within a period of about 5 years, okay, piano is pretty awesome, but within a period of about 5 years, all of a sudden it was like smoke machines and lights and guitar players. And now all of a sudden, if you can sing and you can play guitar and you're a Christian, you are a professional Christian. You are now a pastor, and we are going to put you on a pedestal. And if you look good, we're definitely going to put you at the front. Oh, guess what? If you're another race, you're getting to the front. You're African-American, you're doing it all. Like you have now fit the prerequisite for what we need to be whatever. And I say that to say it also happened in the business world. To be a lead pastor, you now needed to be a successful businessman, not necessarily a shepherd. Well, a shepherd and a servant and a foot washer might look different than a successful businessman. Now, there are successful businessmen who are those things, but we elevated the person who can sing and can play guitar. We elevated the person who was successful at business because those people could create our large churches for us, and they could give us metrics and different things to judge whether we're doing a good job. And all of a sudden the church shifted into, these are the things that it takes to be a pastor. And it takes loving people and a willingness to get down into the grit and the grime with people. That's what it takes. It doesn't matter what you look like, what you sing like, what your business, savvy is. Can you engage in people's lives? Can you serve people? What's it like to be your friend? As a pastor, I ask that all the time of myself. What's it like to be one of my kids? What's it like to be married to me? What's it like to be my friend? What's it like to be on my ministry team? Do they feel loved? One of the things, this is the first time that this has ever happened to me in 20 years of ministry. My supervisor, my lead pastor that I, answer to, if you will, he said, the only thing I care about, Philip, is does your team feel loved by you? I don't care what notes you miss. I don't care about the technology. By the way, we don't have fog machines, but if we did, I don't care about, if the fog machine's at full capacity. I care about, does your team feel loved by you? I mean, my mind is blown by somebody that is, am I discipling people? Does my team feel loved by me? Those are the things that we're chasing after. And it's different than, do you wear skinny jeans? Do you have a beautiful voice? Are you of a different race? Are you business savvy? Like, it's changed, it's shifting. It doesn't mean it's going to be a huge church, but I think ministry is happening more now in my life than I've seen in the past.
I just want to ask you another question based off what you just said. I mean, the church you're describing, and that's exactly the trend I'm seeing. It's like the church is almost like a very bad sitcom that keeps changing the characters for ratings. And we've, tokenized people in the process. And the jokes are just as bad, The solution, and I keep coming back to this. I sound like a broken record, and I'm sorry. And we might have even discussed this. But the solution to love and to serve, for the deconstructing Christian, they might hear that and say, well, I get that outside of the church. I get that outside of the four walls. I get that. And even further, based on what David was saying, I get that even outside of a community that believes in Jesus Christ. That being said, I wonder what the response to deconstructing Christians, because I get this response a lot, is like, why do I need the church? What does the church offer? What tangibly does the church offer me that I can't get from any other community that loves, serves me?
I think it's really easy, at least for me. You get that foundation that comes from Christ, that solid foundation. And our world shifts all over, especially here within the last year. Everything is capable of being shaken. I mean, everything. Your job that you thought was so secure, everything can be removed from you. And the difference between the church and, let's say, gym membership, where you have people that meet you every week and love you and encourage you and do all these different things, is that the church has hope and has the final set. You know, like the church knows the way the story ends. Christ has already told us the way the story ends. And so that's the difference to me, because I have a lot of people in my life who are not believers, but I find that they shift with the world as the world shifts. Whereas I can say that because of my faith in Christ, I've been able to rock a steady line in the midst of many different things that should have shaken me, because I have this hope and this peace and this understanding that comes from Christ. So that's the difference, because you're right. I mean, one of my really good friends described church a lot like her gym membership. You know, it's like, I get all that there, but it's not until things start to shake on you that you realize the gym doesn't do anything for your job loss, but Christ does.
People don't know what the church offers until something horrible happens, then everybody knows. And I think so if we can maintain that outside of a crisis situation, like in Japan 2011, they had a huge earthquake, killed lots of people. And one of the places in the area of the base where we were, one of the places people went was to church, because people know that they can go there and they can find a place of refuge, and they can find, as Phil's getting at, an eternal significance to what's going on. If it's a Christ-like place where folks can really belong, and that is that who I am with all of my stuff has significance that will mean something that will transform the life of someone else. You may go to a gym your whole life and never become a personal trainer, but in Christ, in the body of Christ, your whatever that was is all things working together for the good of them that love the Lord and the call according to his purpose. And the reason that I pastor is not because it pays me well or because it's what somebody else in my family did. It's because I have fallen in love with Jesus Christ. I am filled with the Holy Ghost. I am excited about knowing God, my Father, not him being a fixture or a statue or a painting, but I'm passionate about seeing people delivered the way that I've been delivered. And I want nothing more in my life than to see people have that. And that's something that nobody can give you but the body of Christ, which is a front row seat to the creator of the universe, who said, let there be, and then everybody happened. And he's so big, he could create everything, but then he's so small, he cares about my headache, and he cares about my marriage, and he cares about me. And because he cares about that, and he's in me, now I care about that about you. And that's this weird, intangible thing.
There's that book by Rosaria Butterfield. It's called The Gospel Comes with a House Key, Practicing Radically Ordinary Hospitality in Our Post-Christian World. And when David was talking about what does the church have to offer, and we toss around terms like, oh, we have love, we have Jesus, we have peace, and all these things. I think if we distill it down to back to the Acts church and house churches and all these things, the gospel comes with a house key. If we're not practicing this love or this expression this radically in this way, I don't think people get it. And we've forgotten that. Somewhere along the way, it's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are as followers and believers of Christ, that this is what we did way back when and have done for centuries. Whatever reason, when we went to mega church models, when we went to church in a building, we forgot about it. Oh, to invite someone into my home, to share a meal with them, to have a conversation and dialogue with them and actually love them in this way. No, we've given that up to a pastor. We've given it up to a program to do. But each of us are charged in a sense to do this. And I know it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. I know it's like a challenge, but I really believe that this is the way that we have to go. I mean, yes, COVID restrictions and whatnot aside, that the gospel literally means inviting someone to your home and seeing how you live. And the author of this book was really interesting. She was a doctorate in literature. She was completely against Christianity, like full on really hating what the church had to say. She was in the LGBTQ community. And her argument was the LGBTQ community better than the church does. And part of her dissertation was I need to observe the church in a real manner. So she actually had a pastor who was next door to her, and she said, well, I'm just gonna go over and have interviews with him. And her expectation was, he's gonna bash me with the Bible, he's gonna say all these things, to just validate my claims even further. But what she found was this radically ordinary hospitality. And she found that so compelling that she ended up turning her life over to Christ and all these things. But read the book. I think it's really fascinating in that sense, and what we really need to recapture as far as the church is concerned.
One of the things that has become a mantra for us is, while your faith is personal, it's not private. And we have the faith handed down to us is a communal faith. It's a love your neighbor faith. It's not a you and Jesus is your homeboy faith. I don't know how you can be a follower of Jesus without other followers of Jesus around you. There's tons of stats on how our generation is the most connected generation ever before, and yet we're the most lonely and suicidal and depressed and anxious and afraid generation. So we need each other. We need community. Unfortunately, the same fight the disciples had is the same fight that we still have, which is who's the greatest. And so you have to deal with that. But I'd say one of the cool things I love about church, and I know this is not every church, but I've experienced it in our church, is it's the one place in society where a millionaire can sit next to someone on food stamps and come to the table and receive communion. And moreover, it's the one place where I see people who voted for Trump and people who voted for Joe Biden come and sit next to each other and actually love each other and break out of the silos that social media algorithms kind of create for people. And I don't see a whole lot of other places in society where regularly people who have different views on these things come and sit next to each other and lift their eyes to something bigger. Now, I know a lot of churches don't have that type of diversity in their voting or even their racial makeup or their economic makeup, but ours does, because we focused on the Lamb. If someone's saying, why do I need church? Say, well, your faith isn't private. It is personal, but it's not private. If you're going to grow just in faith, but even outside, you need to be around people who don't look like you, are different age range of you, who think differently, who vote differently, and you need people who will push and pull on you. Iron sharpens iron. The more we live in this life, the more homogenous our circles tend to become, just by default. That's like the path of least resistance. So I think there's incredible value in finding a faith community that is loving and trusting, can hold space, can meet you where you're at, can speak your language, but can also stretch you. And so that's why I'd say, even if you're deconstructing, try to find a place. Now, if you're deconstructing because you're looking for an excuse to throw Jesus away, throw Jesus away. But when I went through my deconstruction, I wanted to love Jesus. I just had to sort through all the BS that came with the church. And so that was my deconstruction. But sometimes people are just looking to get away from their parents' religion and say, well, if it's not yours, throw it away. But if you're looking to love Jesus and want to figure things out, find a safe place that can actually love you and hold gracious space for you while you figure it out.
I think in closing, I want to discuss something for those in deconstruction. I feel like a lot of our conversation has been very helpful, fruitful for those in ministry, for those in churches that may not even know this is happening right under their noses. But we have a following on our site of people in deconstruction. We even have contributors who are going through deconstruction. The rug has gotten pulled out from underneath them. They've become very disillusioned with the church. The church is too conservative. It's too liberal. I don't know what to believe anymore. Is there enough evidence? Is it real? These are the questions, I guess. What would you say to the person who might be watching this right now, feeling that way? What would you say as a pastor?
I would just say, don't look to religion or to the church Go outside and look to the sky. Look and think about the beating of your heart, the breath you're taking in. I feel like God is all around us. I mean, you can just kind of look at this amazing place that we live in, even through its brokenness, and you can see God. Start there. I think no church wants to admit that they're religious, but I would wonder if most churches are religious. And when I say religious, I'm not saying it in a good way. And so a lot of times people who are deconstructing, including myself, when I've gone through my seasons, it's less about God, it's more about the church. And so my beef many times has been with the church and not God. And so I would tell them, just take a step outside and look at creation. Stand next to the ocean. Look at the sky. Watch a forest fire even. I mean, anything. You can just see God in everything.
I'll say to someone who's in deconstruction, if you're in deconstruction, this is the closest you'll ever be to Jesus. And here's what I mean. In Matthew 26, Jesus is facing the pain of the cross, and he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's pushed away most of his friends, brought 3 of them along. He's isolated himself, and he says this in Matthew 26, 38. He says, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." Jesus, knowing that he was doing something good for people, was so depressed that he said he wanted to die. The King James says, "My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death." And then he said to his friends, "Stay here and watch with me. Stay here and be with me." And then he says to God, in verse 39, he says, "My Father, if it's possible, let this suffering be taken away from me." So Jesus said, "I don't know about this. I need somebody to hang with me through this. I'm feeling hurting. All that I've been doing up to this point, got it, believe it. But right now, this sucks really bad." And then at the end of it, he went through his emotions, and it took him some time. And he said at the end of it, "Not my will, but your will be done." And he found his way through. It didn't cost him who he was. It was a moment that he got to feel, and he felt it publicly so that we could look back at it and know that even Jesus had that kind of experience. So when I'm having that place where I'm like, "I don't know, God, this is crazy. I don't even know where you are right now. I don't know where you are in this." I take solace in knowing that I serve a Savior who's like, "I feel you on that. Been there, and I got through it. You can get through this too." So if you're in deconstruction and you're not sure about it, Jesus did everything we did. The Bible says in Hebrews 4 that he did everything that we did, or he experienced all that we did. He was tempted like we were, but without sin. So you're not, even if you're feeling far from the church, you're not far from Christ in deconstruction.
I would say that some deconstruction is good, that going through this process is part of spiritual formation, that part of what we're going through with all our doubts, your disillusionments or disappointments coming to the surface, it's good. Like, you don't want these things hiding under the surface, sweeping under a rug and just thinking, "Oh, everything's hunky-dory." In fact, the word, I believe John Mark Comer says it, disillusionment, we're being dispelled of our illusions. We don't want to live in an illusion. We don't want to live in fantasy land. So the mere fact that you're going through disillusionment, deconstruction, and doubts and all these things, it's a good thing. It's part of the journey. It's part of forming your faith, making it your own, and following Christ even deeper in that sense. My main caution in all of it is, yes, some deconstruction is good, but you can't endlessly deconstruct. You can't just keep doing it into oblivion. You can't just continually break things apart until you're down to your bare bones of nothingness, and then you're in nihilism. Everything is just worthless and pointless. So my main encouragement and challenge through deconstruction is, if you're deconstructing, what are you constructing towards? What are you building up towards? If it's going to be just dismantling your faith, you're done with church, you're out, then maybe you're dismantling down to the point of, okay, what is the hurt? What is the thing that I'm so disappointed about? And maybe it's a time for you to realign what your actual hope was supposed to be in. Because disappointment is really your body's way of saying, hey, your hope was in the wrong thing. And maybe it's time to really fully put it back in Jesus, or really have that relationship again. So in the midst of deconstruction, it's a good thing, but really, really figure out what is it that you're breaking down to build up towards again.
Yeah, I think as a pastor, I would say it's okay You don't need to be afraid or feel shame for being where you're at. And sometimes there's lots of shame, especially if you come from religious families. There's lots of shame in asking questions. But shame and fear aren't friends. They're not helpful. I'd also say you're in good company. You know, John the Baptizer was Jesus' relative, and Jesus said, there's no one been born greater than him. He had some questions when he was in prison. I think you're in good company when you start asking questions. And as Cameron said, have a vision for what reconstruction looks like. I see a lot of people who just want to strip down to the studs, but they have no architecture plans for what a new vision is. I think deconstruction is biblical. If you read the prophets, they're all deconstructing, but they have a vision for what should be. Jesus certainly was deconstructing their system. It's why they killed him. Paul was going, some of the things Paul said to Peter, he's like deconstructing his racism towards the Greeks, towards the Gentiles. You know, there's a biblical way to go about it. But I guess if you're questioning the scriptures altogether, you got bigger fish to fry. But the biggest thing I'd say is, why are you hurting? I have not met a single person who is deconstructing because suddenly they're too smart for the faith. Now, often they walk around as if suddenly they're an intellectual and they're academic and they've really thought about things. And I always think, I think C.S. Lewis was smarter than you, and I'm gonna read him, you know. But usually, 100% of the time, there's a great wound, and there's a great hurt, there's a great disappointment, as Cameron said, and that's where God wants to meet you. There's plenty of people that God saved and they still had questions. I would encourage you not to use your questions as an excuse to not surrender to the love of God, but to actually meet the love of God in your questions.
And I like what it says in Jude 1, it's 122. It says, be merciful to those who have doubt. That we've all offline had a conversation that we've all in this group kind of deconstructed to some extent. And it was people's mercy and grace while we were in that led us back. So I guess that would be my encouragement is for us to be merciful to those who are there. It's not permanent and it could lead to a better place.
Well, I think that about wraps us up for our pastoral roundtable on deconstruction. We would love to hear our audience's thoughts on this discussion. What did you like? What did you not like? We want to see your angry emails. We want to see your happy emails. What are your ideas on this topic, and what questions do you have? We'd like to thank our panel for today, David, Drew, Cameron, and Philip. And we really appreciate your time, talent, and service to God's kingdom. You offered us a lot, great food for thought. Well, thank you very much, and God bless.